Hello everybody and welcome to our virtual 67 Pall Mall. Finally for today, our ex-mayor Yingo will join us from Shanghai while she'll be discussing two of China's most high-profile wines, Châteaux Lafite Rothschild Long Dai and LVMH's Aoyuan. For now, Irish writer Raymond Blake will be telling us about the Irish history of chateaux in Bordeaux. So please chat away on the side, share with us what you're drinking and where you're drinking it from, and put your photos on social media with hashtag 67FromHome. As usual, we'll have 15 minutes at the end to ask questions, and a big hello, a big welcome to Raymond. Welcome back. Hey.
Ronan, hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
That's working okay?
Perfect.
Good.
Great. I will, interesting subject.
Yes.
I will let you carry on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And welcome to everyone here to join me with regard to the Irish Chateau of Bordeaux. I must put Irish, of course, in inverted commas, because some of them are obviously in French hands, but still continue with Irish names. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If any of you have the samples, I would suggest that you pour them all now, because I've poured mine about half an hour ago and tasted through them all and sniffed them there just in the last few minutes before Ronan introduced me, and the development in them was quite noticeable. So I'd suggest pour them all now, and then as well when we're tasting across them, I would suggest you always leave some behind so that you can go back and do some comparisons back and forth. So the Irish Chateau of Bordeaux. I want to start by painting from a broader canvas than that, just to give some background, some context to this story. The whole world knows it. Nobody needs an introduction to the fact that emigration has been part of Irish history for excuse me, literally for centuries now. Literally millions of people have emigrated from the country, usually because of economic hardship, perhaps religious persecution, whatever it might be, and have headed off to the four corners of the world. And within that huge number of people, a small but significant number found their fortune in the wine trade, the wine business, right across the globe. So again, keeping the focus wider than tonight's theme, just for the moment, if you look at America, for instance, Chateau Montelena. Now, some of you may well remember Chateau Montelena was voted the best white wine at the famous Judgment of Paris tasting in 1976. And Montelena is owned by the Barrett family, who hail from Ireland. If you move a couple of thousand miles to South Africa, for instance, Hamilton Russell, the last visit that Anthony Hamilton Russell made to Ireland, he added on a few days so that he could drive around and search out his ancestors' origins. Move across to Australia, the Clare Valley in Australia, north of Adelaide. The Clare Valley is named after County Clare in Ireland, and one of the best known families there producing wine is the Barry family, and their best known wine, their top wine, is the Armagh, which is named after another Irish county. So the Irish wine influence in worldwide stretches right across the globe. But notwithstanding that, there's no question that it's in Bordeaux that Irish people have had the most significant influence over a period of at least 3 centuries now. And it started really as a consequence of Irish importers in Ireland, for instance, the city of Galway in the west of Ireland, found that they were importing a lot of wine, and it was a good idea to have somebody in Bordeaux to represent their interests and so on and so forth. So that started the movement towards that. I should say that we're inordinately proud of our connections with Bordeaux. Any Irish wine lover is inordinately proud and never fails to tell people all about the connections, and perhaps we big them up a little at times, but what the heck, it's wine after all. We're here to enjoy it, and we feel even almost proprietorial rights over some of the chateaux that bear Irish names. Even if we seem to feel as if we perhaps even own a pixel or two of those chateaux. We serve them up whenever we can, there's no doubt about it. And whenever funds permit, usually, but whenever we can, we'll serve up those wines, the Lynch Badge or the Lave of Bart, the Fusel, the ones we're having here today, but others as well, Kerwin, Filansagur, Dillon, Clark, McCarthy, the list goes on. And most memorably, I would say, perhaps the biggest celebration ever in Ireland, I think, of the Châteaux of the Irish Châteaux happened last year. I was delighted to be commissioned to organize a big dinner here in Dublin last year, and I just have some photographs from that I want to show you now. So we'll see if we can get the screen share going. There we go. Just give me a second and we get to full screen there. And we go on another one. This dinner that I organized last year was for 180 people, all of whom came literally from around the globe, all within the aviation industry. And the primary purpose of the celebration was to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the first transatlantic flight, which landed in Ireland in June 1919, and there last year, 100 years to the day afterwards, an aircraft leasing company called Avalon, and I should interject here and say that Ireland is essentially the headquarters of the worldwide aviation finance and leasing industry. So Avalon, one of the largest of these companies, decided to celebrate that centenary, and that would do it with the Irish wines, that we call them, as I say, in inverted commas. So I was tasked with organizing that event. It was a fantastic event. We had Fusal, we had Naval Barton, and we had Lynch Bash. And we also had representatives from each of the, that's another shot there. We had representatives from each of the chateaux who we have here. On the left is Pierre Lawton. Now, Pierre is a direct descendant of Abraham Lawton, who left Ireland, 200 or more years ago to set himself up as a negociant, broker, and so forth. And Pierre is still one of the most significant negociants in Bordeaux. Next to him is Kinu Kaz Hashma. Kinu is the daughter of Jean-Michel Kaz and the sister of Jean-Charles Kaz of Lynch Bash. And next to her is Damien Barton Sartorius, son of Lillian Barton and grandson of Anthony Barton. Now, just again by way of introduction, I think the choosing Bordeaux as their base, the Irish people who had there, was obviously the place to go. If you think of Bordeaux, just in general, it hardly needs repeating or stating, but the situation of Bordeaux, surrounded on three sides by vast vineyards producing huge quantities and quality wine, and perhaps more importantly for trade purposes, on the fourth side you have the Atlantic Ocean. So the world is your market there in a much easier way, for instance, than a trapped inland producing region such as Burgundy. If you think about it, 200 years ago, transporting wine, a heavy, bulky commodity, transporting it over land was very difficult. Oversea, you put it down into the hold of the ship and it acts as ballast, and away you go. I mentioned as well that we're almost proprietorial about the Irish Chateau, but we're delighted, certainly if somebody in my position would write about wine all the time, I visit Bordeaux a lot, it's nice to know that there's a reciprocal feeling there. And you can see, for instance, I'm just bringing up the next shot, in Château Filin-Ségur, for instance, they've consciously painted the dining room in green to acknowledge the Irish link back. Mr. Phelan came originally from Clonmel in Ireland. Moving on anyway, the next shot, I always love this photo. This is a particular favorite of mine. This is outside Château de Fusal. And as I say, as you drive up there, you have this sense, it's almost like, you know, when you see your national flag flying in a foreign capital over your embassy, you feel like, hey, this is like our embassy here. So we've got the Irish flag, the French flag, obviously, and the EU flag. And the first wine that we're going to have this evening is a Fusal Blanc 2013. So let's have a look at this. So Fusal Blanc, I poured this about half an hour ago now at this stage, and already it's showing development. The note I made at that point, excuse me, the note I made at that point was a beautiful gold color, not the pale, bright lime that you'd have in a very young wine, but it's developed a lovely burnished gold color, and a savory, quite a pungent nose. Continuing on to the palate as well there. Definitely a food wine, no question about it. But within the half an hour, on the nose, there's another note almost of caramel, a richer nose is coming through there. Similarly savory on the palate still. Really, really looking for some serious food, no doubt about it. Just to tell you something about this wine, it's roughly a 50-50 Sauvignon Semillon blend. It's 52 Sauvignon Blanc, 52-48. Dry white Grave is a particular favorite of mine for all sorts of reasons. I mean, it's one of the great overlooked wine styles of the world. If you talk to people who know it, they rate it highly. So I always say it's overlooked, but not underrated. If you talk to people who know it, they certainly don't underrate it. What I love about it is usually when it's very young, you find that the Sauvignon Blanc is in the ascendant, as I say. It's sitting sort of above the Semillon. As time goes by, the Semillon comes in and it adds a bit of ballast to the wine. It takes the singular pointedness out of it and adds some ballast to the wine. And then they move into like a tertiary phase where you find the identity of each grape tends to get sort of subsumed into something new at this stage. And that's this wine, I think, is just on the edge of that new development, moving into a different phase altogether. This wine was really highly regarded by Robert Parker when he tasted it. Many of you may follow his wine advocate and so forth. I'll just have a look at what he had to say. Here he rated it his highest rating of all the dry white Bordeaux he tasted that year, and possibly the greatest Fusal since the legendary 1985. And I'm in the fortunate position that I also I drank the Fusal 85 at the Châteaux when it was about 25 years of age. It was an extraordinary wine. I'm not sure this one is going to beat it in the long run. The other wine every sip seemed to reveal a different facet, something new and interesting and different each time. At first you were tempted to dismiss it as being a little bit light. Then you said, no, wait a second, that's quite intense and it's coming on. Then you taste it again and you get a fuller, richer quality to it, but almost ageless. At 25 years, it was a superb wine. Just with regard to Châteaux de Fusal, just want to go back and show you. Share screen. With regard to Châteaux de Fusal, when the Quinns bought it, the family, Lachlan and Brenda Quinn bought Fusal nearly 20 years ago. Lachlan and Brenda lived in Dublin, and there was no residence there. So the first thing they had to do was build a house. And that's what they did. And this is their residence right beside the chateau, which is just to the left there. This is me trying to be a bit arty, taking a photograph through a length of piping that I found there while they were building the new winery. So the first thing they had to do was that. The second thing was find themselves a winemaker. So that's Lachlan and Brenda. And on the right, you have Stéphane Carrier. Stéphane coincidentally had worked previously at Lynch Badge and also at Newton in the States. And this is within the new winery there. And then just seeing as though we're drinking the white wine, this is the white wine cellar. Just to tell you a little bit more about the white wine, one interesting fact about it is, which is quite unusual, is that the aging of the wine takes place in 75% oak barrels and 25% acacia wood barrels. Now, this is to lessen, Stéphane wants to lessen the impact of the oak coming through in the final taste. And the acacia wood barrels are 400 litre barrels. The wood is harder to work, so it's not as easy to make such a big, small barrel there. So they make them bigger. The staves are thicker. So there's less exchange of oxygen through the wood and less influence in that sense there. But it's a quirky little fact which is worth bearing in mind. Now, totally aside from this, just I love telling stories about wine rather than, you know, talking about pH and residual sugar and things like that. I love the whole background story, the family business and the rest of it. This here, as you can see, as I said, there is the White Barrel Hall cellar in Fusal. Now, the Cru Classé of Grave, the 14 Cru Classé, which include, you know, Aubryon, La Mission, Aubaye, Domaine de Chevalier, Carbonieux, and so forth. In rotation, they host a big dinner every year. They call it the Akabai dinner. Now, Akabai is not a very well-known word, but it's like a pole dinner, an end of harvest dinner. It takes place in November each year, as I say, in rotation amongst the chateau. And they would have 250, 300 people in attendance. They invite a lot of sommeliers from all around France, from the Relais and Chateau, from Michelin-starred restaurants and so on and so forth, and all the wines available on the night. All of the chateau. There's a big tasting beforehand, and then a great big dinner. So this then is how the White Cellar looked when Fusal hosted the Akabai dinner. And you can see around here. You'll have to trust me when I point out. Each of these is like a portrait of each of the different wines, each of the 14 Chateau here. And I was inordinately proud to be there that evening, because Lachlan and Brenda invited my wife, Fanula, who's a professional violinist, to perform before the dinner that evening. So we were absolutely delighted to be there, and the whole thing went very well for us. Now we move on. Blanc de Lynchbage. Now, there's all sorts of anorak facts that need to be dealt with here before we taste this wine. The Fusal it's a Château de Fusal white. Okay, this is called Blanc de Lynchbage, so this is not Château Lynchbage. The reason being that there is an appellation. The appellation for the Fusal wine is Pessac Léonin. Pessac Léonin is the appellation that was, you know, like carved out of Grave there about 32 years ago, I think it was. 32 years ago, was it? Yeah, my maths. And it has an appellation for white wine there. There's no appellation. Lynchbage is in Pauillac. There's no appellation for white wine in Pauillac. So it's just called Blanc de Lynchbage, and the wine is an appellation Bordeaux. Nothing more complicated than that. So it's just the appellation Bordeaux. It's made from Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Muscadel. And it's got quite a high percentage of Muscadel. I'm just going back over some notes here. The percentage of Muscadel in this wine is 17%. Usually you just find a little whisper of Muscadel in, but this is considerably higher at 17%. You've got 50% Sauvignon Blanc, 33% Semillon, and 17% Muscadel. It comes from a 5.5 hectare plot to the west of Lynchbage. If you know where Lynchbage is in Pauillac, it's to the west, on land that they feel is better suited to producing white wines rather than growing red grapes. I think the Muscadel is having a significant influence here. There's a much more exotic note to this wine than the Fusal. The Fusal had a firmer, dare I say, more serious note. There's a flamboyance here, which I'm sure is coming more from the Muscadel than anything else. As I said, it's used here. I often say when it's used in a tiny percentage, it's used like a seasoning. This has now moved on from being a seasoning to being a fully fledged ingredient, you might say, rather than just a seasoning. Lovely exotic nose. And tingling fruit on the palate. Now, I remember tasting the Blanc de Lynchbage, back 15 years ago or so. It was a heavier wine. There seemed to be more oak influence in that to me. I think they've done a better job here now than previously. This wine has got a delicious tingle, lovely singing fruit more than anything else. It's got that singular note, and it's really good. You could hang a drink me label around the neck and you wouldn't be telling any lies with that. But just to tell you a little bit about Lynch badge, this comes from, just to show you now, this is Jean-Michel Caz, the patriarch of the family, and his son Jean-Charles Caz, who's now in charge. The Lynch family came from Galway in the west of Ireland and were well known as wine traders there before they ever set foot in Bordeaux. But just to get my facts right now, I need to check and see. James Lynch emigrated to France, and his son Thomas established himself as a wine merchant in Bordeaux and bought Lynch badge in 1749. He became very much established in the Bordeaux society as well. His sons were Michel and Jean-Baptiste, and Jean-Baptiste Lynch became mayor of Bordeaux, and Michel was mayor of Pauillac. Lynch badge was sold in 1824, so they owned it for about, the Lynch family owned it for about three-quarters of a century, and eventually came into the ownership of the Caz family, again, about three-quarters of a century ago. So the Caz family have owned it for about the same period of time as the Lynch family owned it. And they themselves are very cognizant of their links to Ireland. For instance, Jean-Michel's sister, Sylvie, spent a year as a language assistant in the university in Galway there when she was a student herself. So there was Jean-Charles, who you see here in this photograph. He's a regular visitor to Ireland, and is very happy, very pleased with the links that we foster and celebrate all the time. So we move on. Our first red wine, Châteaux de Fusal Blanc. Sorry, Châteaux de Fusal Red. What am I talking about? Getting a bit confused there. And we move on to here. This is the new barrel cellar at Fusal. I just want to tell you a little bit about the Quinns bought Fusal when the 2000 vintage was in barrel. Now, Lachlan was a successful Irish businessman. He developed a taste for wine. I interviewed him shortly after he bought Fusal. He developed a taste for wine as a young accountant in London with Arthur Anderson in the late 60s. And he'd be sent out to do audits around the country, would stay overnight in a hotel. And as he said himself, like, great wine at the time wasn't hugely expensive. And the differential in price between, say, a second growth and a first growth wasn't extraordinary either. So he started drinking these sort of wines, and came back, established himself in business, and started looking for a chateau in the late 80s, viewed a number of chateaux, then that's went off the boil, business took over again, but then eventually bought Fusal, as I say, nearly 20 years ago, and has done an extraordinary job in renovating it. As I say, first of all, get yourself a good winemaker, and then build a whole new winery, a complete works. I visited Fusal just after they bought it, when it was, the old regime was pretty much still in place. I visited when the winery was being built, and to see, like, I mean, they started from a clean slate, wiped the whole thing clean, and said, we start from scratch. And talking to Stephen Carrier then at that time was fascinating, because a point he made to me, I'll just come out of here. A point Stefan made to me when the new winery was being built was that, this was a once in a career opportunity for him. Indeed, it wouldn't come by once in every winemaker's career to start from a clean slate, with people saying to him, the owners saying, we want a new winery, we want it done properly, we want it done basically your way. And so he was able to do exactly what he wanted. He was like a kid on Christmas morning, to be honest with you. And they got the winery built and successfully. I want to show you some other shots from the winery here. That's Red Barrel Cellar. This here, I remember Stefan telling me, and this is relevant to the wine we're about to taste, telling me that he has, as you can see, open top wooden fermenters. He has stainless steel vats. And trust me, I'll show you this a better photograph, but way down there at the back, you can just see the edge of some concrete fermentation tanks. I'll show you some of that in a minute. But let's have a look at our third wine, the Fusal Rouge from 2012. I'll grab some notes there. Let's stop the share there for a second. Now I have to say to you folks, when I smelt this earlier, I just said, it's got that gorgeous, what I call a dry, dusty, savory nose that speaks to me of Grave. It's just got that, it's a sort of a subdued character to it. It's not launching itself out of the glass at you. It's got a lovely subdued, gentle, comforting. It's comforting rather than challenging. I think it was the Irish wine writer Maurice Healy years ago, back in the 1930s, who described the difference between Grave and Médoc. Essentially, they're both left bank. Essentially, they're the same. He said essentially what they are essentially is the same photograph. The Médoc printed on gloss paper, the Grave printed on matte paper. It's the best description, the best analogy I've ever heard to describe the difference between Grave and the Médoc. And it's coming through beautifully in this wine, a softness in the wine. It's not in any way aggressive, and particularly on the nose. I could smell this wine all day. It's drinking beautifully now. Everything I said about the nose is carrying on to the palate. And reading Stefan's assessment of it, this was a difficult vintage, a tricky vintage where, you know, it was one of those things where it wasn't ideal at any stage through. And that's where you need a really good winemaker, a good vigneron. That's where they respond to what's happening, to weather conditions, and they do something in response. They don't just have a rigid view of what needs to happen and impose it no matter what. So he had to respond many, many times to deal with all sorts of difficulties. But as he said himself, as he writes here himself, the start of the summer school, finally in August, he said, finally in August, the sun appeared for a prolonged period and temperatures rose well above average, bringing smiles and sighs of relief to the vineyard team. So rescued by late sunshine. We've heard that before. 1978, for instance, was rescued by late sunshine. 2008, which we're having from the Lynch badge, would be similar to that as well. But lovely character here, a hint of that sort of cigar box, a mild green character as well, a certain mild green note coming through on the palate. But what I wanted to say to you about it was that, and I'm reading from Stefan's notes here, that the different plots were vinified separately. The Merlot and Cabernet Franc were fermented in stainless steel. The Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot were principally fermented in concrete, with some batches of the Cabernet Sauvignon fermented in large wooden vats. And that was the thing that Stefan said to me early on when the winery was being commissioned, was that he had this facility to move as he wanted to with different plots, choose which vessel he wanted to ferment them in, and also respond a little bit to the vintage characters as well, saying, maybe I need to push it a bit this way or come back this way a little bit. So that gave him great flexibility and facility. Now, I did mention the concrete vats there earlier, and I want to go back and just show you. Because as I said to you, when you're driving up to Fusal, you see the Irish flags there. You think that's wonderful, you know, a lovely character, nice. As I said to you, it's like the Irish embassy in Bordeaux. But what's even nicer is when you go inside and you see these are the concrete vats. I'll just show you a couple of these. You'll see that each has a name on them. There's another one. And there's another one. And they've all been named after Lachlan and Brenda's grandchildren, which I think is a fabulous little touch, you know. So the children can go along and say, hey, that's my vat there, you know. And they all go and visit and so forth and that, and they're able to, shall we say, lay claim to it. But that appeals to me. I love the fact that all of the wines we're tasting today, all of the Châteaux, we're talking about are family owned. I think that brings a different tenor, a different sense to it than if it's a corporate. For instance, Fusal was bought from a bank. It was owned by a bank. And you know, that's a more faceless sort of way of doing things. It's an investment which, you know, it's got to pay off and that sort of thing. Whereas this is a real family undertaking. So we move on. Just before we go, I love this photograph. This is Fusal as well. And this reminds me, this is a totally nerdy thing to say, I suppose, but this reminds me of, if any of you remember Get Smart from the 1960s. And he had to go through all these doors that opened and closed as he walked down like this. That's all I can think of when I see this photograph. This again, as I say, is Fusal again. But we move on to Lynch Badge 08. Let's have a look at this. Now, I refer, I just want to come out of this here. I refer to 2008 and others like it as a shoulder vintage or a hidden vintage, because 2008, another classic example is 2001. They got overshadowed by what came before them or went after them. So 01 was overshadowed by 2000. 08 was immediately overshadowed by 2009 and 2010, and sort of got a bit lost there. For a real, you know, a claret lover who's looking for something at a much more attractive price point, you know, you can go for something like this. You need to be sure of your ground because you need to be buying from a really good producer. But those good producers in these slightly trickier years can turn out wonderful wines. And I remember tasting in Bordeaux in March 2010. Now that's a year after the Primeur tasting. So that tasting is happening just before the wines are bottled. So I think you get a more valid impression of the wines. And I was lucky to taste this wine along with, I tasted about 100 wines then. But I tasted the Lynch Badge 08 on the 11th of March 2010. I wrote, this was my note: dark and brooding, concentrated and dense, a serious intensity, a long haul wine, big but balanced. So now let's come back and see, was I right? I think it's answering some of the things I said there. Yeah, for me, it's got what I call a more pointed flavor than the more expansive Fusal. The Fusal has a rounder character to it. It's important always, I always talk about texture in wine as well as flavor. So there's a softer texture in the Fusal, and here a firmer, more structured texture. But of course, that's exactly what you expect, not just from Lynch Badge, but it's what you also expect from Pauillac. If any wine is structured, if any Bordeaux is known for structure more than anything else, it's Pauillac. Just a few facts and details about it. It spent 15 months in French oak, 75% new. It's principally Cabernet Sauvignon, 78% Cabernet Sauvignon, 13 Merlot, 7 Cabernet Franc, and 2% Petit Verdot. In some respects, I think of this wine as being singular and intense. I'd say another couple of years will soften that a little bit, so iron out some of the firmer edges that are still there. There's a tannic grip there. Even as I'm speaking now, I can still feel, you know, quite a firm tannic grip there, which I think will soften over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. After that, then perhaps the fact that it's not a super vintage might begin to be a bit exposed. So I'm thinking the drinking window for this wine is going to be in the sort of over the next 5-year period. And I think it'll be very satisfying. It's got a lovely freshness to it. Definitely needs food, no question about it. It needs food, but I think it could deliver real satisfaction then. So now let's go back and see if I can. Lynch Badge. We go on. This is a very familiar site to anybody who's ever passed by. As I say, we're right in the heart of Bordeaux, of Pauillac here. I often say to people, you know, if we're talking about Lével Barton later and Lynch Bages now, if someone says to me, well, what does Saint Julien taste like, or what does Pauillac taste like? I'd say, drink Lynch Bages and you'll know what Pauillac tastes like. Drink Lével Barton and you'll know what Saint Julien tastes like. Pauillac is a bigger shouldered, more muscular, more structured, firm wine. Saint Julien marches to a softer beat, a more gracious, elegant beat. They're beautifully contrasting in different styles, but both wonderfully satisfying for me. Let me just go through there. Now, you know, you get a lot of stock. I get sent a lot of stock photographs from Châteaux and all the rest of it for my job. And, you know, some of them aren't exactly imaginative, but I like this. I like this photo. I like the fact you've got Jean-Charles Caz there in the middle, you see, with the harvest team. This is the harvest team at Lynch Bages. This is the old winery at Lynch Bages. The photograph earlier I had of Jean-Charles Caz, there earlier, he was standing here. So this is now like a museum winery. And for anyone who wants to know what it was like, the winemaking process was like in the old days, this is a great place to visit because it's in a great state of preservation and was used, I think it was up until 1975 it was used. I'm not certain about that. But if you see that latticed floor there, well, if you go up this stairs here, this is what you come to. That's the lattice floor I showed you. And that's the top of those wooden vats there as well. And all sorts of various equipment there just to take you back. Now, a separate point I want to make, and which I really find very encouraging, is the fact that in each case here, Fusail, Lynch Bages, and the Lévels, the Barton family, there's still great dynamism. It's often the case that, you know, the dynamism fades away, but the Caz family are incredibly dynamic when it comes to the whole wine business. They've owned Orme de Pez. I put this in here to let people know they've owned Orme de Pez for many decades. But just there recently, they bought Châteaux au Bataille, and they're doing a great renovation job there. They also own a domain in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. They make other wines. So L'Hostal Caz. They have a whole range of wines out there. So they're absolutely dynamic. They're not sitting back and just saying, "Oh, we make Lynch Bages and, you know, send it out there. Everyone will buy it." That sort of thing. That's certainly not happening. Not happening with them. In terms of being adventurous, though, I suppose even opening your own restaurant can count as well. This is in the village. This is in the village of Bages itself. And this said, the Lavenal, the name Lavenal, that is Jean-Michel Caz's grandmother, I think, maternal grandmother's maiden name. Her name was Lavenal. And this is a showcase for their wines and also a very nice place to eat if you happen to be visiting. And in terms of travel, no wine has traveled as much as this bottle of Lynch Bages, 1975. Actually, it's a half bottle, and I must apologize for the quality of the photograph. I had to take it through a gate. But this bottle itself traveled on the space shuttle years ago and was brought back and is now proudly displayed in the chateau. And it covered a distance of 2.9 million miles, as far as I know. So let's see what we got next. So we're coming to our next wine, Langoa Barton, 2005. Now, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to distinguish between where does Langoa Barton end and Lével Barton begin. And I'll try and unravel that a little bit here. You see, they're both made at the same place. There's one chateau where both wines are made. The senior wine is Lével Barton. It's a second growth, and Langoa Barton is a third growth. Now, with regard to the Barton family, just to give you some detail there, the Barton family emigrated from Ireland in 1722. Thomas Barton, emigrate. He was from Fermanagh, and he quickly established himself in the Bordeaux wine trade. It's important to note, it's worth noting that typically these emigrants establish themselves first as traders rather than producers. And then as a consequence of being successful at that, they could then move on and buy Châteaux in Bordeaux. And there's still that clear distinction. Somebody pouring themselves a bottle of Lynch Bages at home or, on the far side of the world, they may not be aware of the clear distinction between production of the wine and then the commercializing, marketing of the wine. The production happens at the Châteaux. The Châteaux sell their wines to the negociants, and it's then the negociants who market the wines, trade the wines, and so on and so forth. And that's largely the way it still is. So the Irish influence has been in both camps. As I said to you earlier, Pierre Lawton is still a significant player there, and the Nathaniel Johnson's negociant business is still run by descendants of his. But the public face is much more the Châteaux, and that's what we see here. If there is a senior Irish Châteaux in Bordeaux, it's definitely Barton. So Lango and Léoville. Lango was bought by Hugh Barton in 1821, and Léoville was bought in 1826. Now, Hugh Barton was Thomas Barton's grandson. Now, he had to flee France after the Revolution, and he came back to Ireland, and he bought a place called Straffan House. And that remained in the Barton family until, I think it was 1949. And Anthony Barton, the current patriarch of the family, Anthony Barton was born in Straffan House in Ireland. And Straffan House today, it's gone through a number of changes of ownership, but Straffan House is like a country club called the K Club, and it's where the Ryder Cup was held. If any of you are interested in golf, the Ryder Cup was held there in 2006. Talking of golf, by the way, as a little aside, Pierre Lawton is a very, very keen golfer, and his wife is a former professional golfer. And any excuse to come to Ireland involves golf. He will always be playing golf. No matter what the weather is, he'll be out playing golf, as well as presenting wines at dinners and tastings and so on and so forth. So he has a very strong connection still to his Irish roots. So the Lango Barton 05. Now 05, people in my position, we take a cynical view about the phrase vintage of the century, because already this century, which is only 20 years old, there's been maybe 5 vintages of the century, depending on how you count, and this is certainly one of them. And you're getting it. I mean, there's a power here coming through in this wine. And when I tasted it earlier, it's 15 years old at this stage. I think at this stage of its development, the vintage is speaking more than the Appellation. I think perhaps in 5 years' time, that would have settled down with that rich, full, strong, warm, hot vintage will have settled a bit. It's a bit like, someone growing into this, you see a young adolescent and they get a bit out of proportion, they get a bit too tall for themselves, and then eventually, they settle down into proper proportions. This wine is still speaking very much of the vintage, the strong, strapping sort of a character about it. I think another 5 years, it needs another 5 years to really blossom and for the harder edges to soften off it. Quite a firm tannic, firm bit of tannin there. Still slightly masking the fruit, but everything coming together nicely. The components are all there. It's just that at the moment they're standing a little bit separate still, but you can see that they are going to meld together. So what have we got here? We have spent between 16 to 18 months in French oak barrel, 60% new. It's a blend of just over half Cabernet Sauvignon, 53% Cabernet Sauvignon, high proportion of Merlot, 33.5 Merlot, and 13.5 Cabernet Franc. Now, I also was lucky to taste, I mentioned about tasting the 08 vintage in March 2010. I also tasted at the same annual tasting. I tasted the '05 vintage in March '07. And at the time I noted in general, just as a general comment, I noted that I thought Saint-Julien as an appellation was the most impressive. Not to say that the others weren't, but I just thought that the Saint-Julien seemed to be a more complete, the wines of Saint-Julien seemed to me then to be more complete than the other ones and more attractive. And sometimes, you know, when you're assessing wines and they're very young like that, you know, you can see all those building blocks separate and discrete, and you have to try and assess and see, well, you know, are they there in good measure? Will they, as they move forward together, will one drop out, or will they come to the finishing line together? And that's what you really want. And that's certainly what I was seeing in the Saint-Juliens there. So moving on to just show you a few shots of the Bartons. This is Lillian Barton. So Lillian is Anthony's daughter. Lillian Barton Sartorius, her husband is Sartorius. And then her children are Damien. We had a shot of Damien earlier. That's Damien and his sister Melanie, both of whom are completely involved in the family business. So moving on now to our final wine, Léoville Barton. That Châteaux did, I was saying there about trying to unravel the complication of where Langoa ends and Léoville begins. The Châteaux itself, strictly speaking, is Langoa Barton. It's used on the label of Léoville, which is the senior wine, as I said. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. Let me see if I can show the photograph of it here. Sorry, no, I need to talk about the wine first, and then I will get to talk about the other. So I tasted this wine for the first time. I tasted it on the 8th of March 2007, and this is actually at the tasting in Bordeaux. You can see all these wines are from Saint-Julien, and trust me when I say there's Léoville Barton down there on the extreme left. You've Gru La Rose, Talbot, Béchevel, and a great stack of wine in the background, as you can see. So what I said about the wine then, oodles of blackcurrant fruit and some spice, firm structure, lovely charming fruit, rich and long, a robust tannin in the ascendant, but everything else there too, a very good wine. So now let's see what it's like after all those years. Did I get it right? So straight away, lots of blackcurrant fruit, oodles of blackcurrant fruit there. And density of flavor. This is still young. This is still young. I drank a Magnum with friends. I shared a Magnum of 1996 Lynch Badge at 21 years of age. And I remember thinking it was absolutely spot on, just bang, right, just like a bullseye, you know? And I remember thinking if I'd drunk it, say 10 years earlier, I would have said, yes, delicious. But, you know, I could see up ahead that there was something better around the next corner. And that's what I'm feeling about this wine. This wine revealed itself only fully after you swallow it, on the length. There's a ringing, echoing length coming through there. And it's like a message from afar saying, hey, you know, however good it is now, there's much better stuff around the corner. 10 years time, I think this is going to be absolutely spot on. But for the moment, it's delicious. There's so much in there. There's just a little bit of heft, which when it softens out, it will allow a sweetness to come into the flavor and into the texture. Now, when I say sweetness, I don't mean a sugary sweetness. It's like when you talk of a sweet sound, you know, really when you think about it, it sounds sweet, but this is what comes into great claret, I think, when it ages. And Léoville Barton, as I said earlier, you know, in terms of grace and harmony and beauty, it's quintessential Saint-Julien. It's classic claret. And even, you know, that now that's been in the glass for about an hour. I first tasted it about an hour ago, and there is a bit of that development coming. there is a bit of that sweetness coming into it, where the tannin is subsiding a little bit and the fruit is being allowed to bubble up more to the surface there. But it's the length of that wine. That's where it reveals itself. The length of that wine is superb. So let's just see, I have a few more shots to show you here. So this is the tasting where I first tasted it many moons ago. And then this is the Châteaux itself, as per the label. And you know, I'm a bit of an old romantic, to be honest with you. And I just say, like, you see something like this and you say, you know, something that beautiful is bound to produce something beautiful. And I always think of Label Barton as a gracious, beautiful wine. And is it any wonder when it comes from a place like this? Because look around now, if we go around behind, there's beautiful gardens, like so, in behind the Châteaux. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like there. That's more of a workaday shot, taken over the vineyards back towards the Châteaux. That there again is an entrance into like the working side of things. The vat room, all fermented in large old wooden vats. And now, this is obviously a completely new setup. This isn't at Léoville or Langoa. This is at Mauvaisin Barton. Now, I mentioned earlier the dynamism that's still present, the dynamism that all of these people show. The three we're featuring here this evening. And this is a great example of it. A few years ago, the Barton family bought Château Mauvaisin. It's now Mauvaisin Barton. And they've done it, as you can see, this is all brand new. They've done a fantastic job of renovation and so forth. And I'll be absolutely frank with you and say, for the first couple of years, I wasn't that impressed with the wine. But last, I'll just come out of there. Last year, last March, March 19, I tasted the 18 Mauvaisin Barton with Damien Barton in Bordeaux on Primeur. And I just said to him, you've got it. Bang on. It was such a leap forward. It took them a while, it took them a few years, but it's such a leap forward. And today, for people who remember a time when they could buy maybe second growth, third growth claret at a reasonable, not break the bank price, at a reasonable price, and they're now getting out of age, I would say look for Mauvaisin Barton and others like it, because it's still reasonably priced, and it's a classic drop of claret as well. It's a really nice wine. 3 or 4 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to say that hand on heart. I would have said, yeah, it's okay. But now I think from 18 on, it has developed really, really well. And again, just to show you, it is a beautiful place. That's Mauvaisin Barton, the new Châteaux. And just to finish where we started, the flags at Fusal. I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that view that you're seeing there may well be reproduced somewhere else in Bordeaux in the next few years, because I know there is one Irish businessman very interested in purchasing a significant property. May not happen, but I have my fingers crossed that it will, because we might get another little embassy like that. So now, Ronan, have we any questions there at that stage?
Ray, there aren't any questions. Maybe if anyone does have questions, maybe you could write them in the Q&A box at the moment. There's plenty of comments in the chat though.
Okay.
Michael is saying he missed the chance to try the wines, but he's enjoying 2007 Lynch Barge, which is drinking beautifully, and a far too young Echo de Lynch Barge 16.
Oh yeah.
And Nigel is trying a 1998 Label Barton that he says will go well with his leg of lamb this evening. Yeah, so lots of comments,
yeah.
But no questions. I think you must have done a good job of explaining that yeah, there's no questions.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading that. Yeah. Excellent. Nigel Warner. Oh, well done, Nigel. I know him well. He'd like a drop of claret. He's a good claret man. Well, I think it's a nice story, and perhaps the next installment could be a worldwide Irish Châteaux.
Absolutely, that'd be very interesting.
There are so many connections out there. Perhaps I should just to acknowledge I'm not sure if people will be able to see this. If I hold it, this is a book called A Kingdom of Wine by a man called Ted Murphy. And that is a great compendium of Irish links all around the world, in the wine world. Now that's would be out of print now, but I mean, you certainly get it on Amazon or searching online, you'll certainly find it. But there is a great story out there still, and it's still current. I mean, there's a lady, she's a pharmacist here in Ireland, and she makes wine in Burgundy. Roisin Curley is her name, and micronegociant there. There's people all over the place. I forgot, actually, I didn't mention there, Châteaux du Tertre for a period was owned by an Irishman, Peter Mitchell from Dublin, and he set up the first bottle factory in Bordeaux, and the winemaker there is a man called David Fennelly from Ireland as well. So there's connections all over the place, but we're very good at finding those connections, to be honest with you. And as I said, you know, we've no hesitation in bigging them up when we get around to it, but we are proud of it. And it's really nice, though, as I said, to say there, it's really nice to see that the Châteaux reciprocate. You know, as I said, like at Felin-Segur, at Lynch-Badge, at Barton, they're really cognizant of their connections back to Ireland, and very proud to fly that flag, as it were, you know.
Yeah, and Ivan is asking, do you know if there's any Irish connections with the Châteaux in Sauternes?
Well, yes, this is, you know, Château Yquem was owned by Lursalus for centuries, as you know, and his wife back in around 1870 was Anne McMahon. Now, Anne McMahon was the niece of Patrice McMahon, or MacMahon as they were pronounced, the first president of France, Patrice McMahon, who actually lived in, his family still is in Château de Suy in Burgundy, magnificent old chateau in Burgundy. But for a period, as I say, she was the wife of Lursalus at Château Yquem, and she was the niece of the president of France, who was MacMahon, first president of France, as far as I know, in the 1870s, 73 to 79, I think it was. He was a marshal of France as well. So some connection there, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there must be a lot of connections in places like Australia, New Zealand, things like that.
Yeah, so, definitely. Australia, lots of connections. I mean, Maurice O'Shea, you know, you probably know the Maurice O'Shea trophy every year. His mother was Irish. New Zealand also, Jane Hunter was married to her husband was from Northern Ireland. Hunter's there. Sam Neill in New Zealand. Sam Neill, the actor, if you remember what the Hunt for Red October he was in, and also in Peaky Blinders. Sam Neill's father was from Ireland. He makes the Two Paddocks wine, beautiful Pinot Noir, really super Pinot Noir. Bernardo O'Higgins was in South America. That's another famous Irish name. Other ones in the States as well. And oh yeah, in much closer to you, Ronan, Whiston. You know Whiston sparkling wine. Well, of course, the winemaker there is Irish, Dermot Sugru, and he makes sparkling wine under his own name as well. Whiston, I think, is fabulous wine. You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, we tend to get out there all over the place. You know, we're good at that. We've a history of that.
Yeah. I did spend a year or so in Asia, in Thailand and Vietnam, and everywhere you go, there's an Irish bar that sells Murphy's. I don't know how they managed to get it into the middle of Thailand, but you'll find an Irish bar there.
That's right. You'll always find one somewhere. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Raymond. I think that was a really interesting session with some great wines. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ronan. Delighted to be with you.